Welcome to this first look at WilloWare's new Tariff Module for Dynamics GP. We're going to jump right into the software and take a look at the endpoint, which is calculating the tariff. There are two ways it can add the tariff to a sales transaction. It can either add it in as a line item, or it can add it to the miscellaneous field. To manually recalculate tariff on a single document, go up to the additional menu and select Recalculate Tariff. So you can see here, it's using a tariff item number and adding it into the document and recalculating. If you do use a trade discount, the trade discount stays unchanged, so that is not affected by the tariff. So we'll remove the tariff line item. So let's look at a few more examples of how this calculation works. Right now, we have this set up so that China is being calculated at a percent of value, and it's 10%. Let's change that to 20%. And then 128 SDRAM has China as the country of origin. So if we recalculate this document, unit cost is $50, 20% is 10. Let's change this calculation from percent of value to percent of extended price and make this 10%. And now if we recalculate the tariff, you can see that the miscellaneous field has been updated with 10% of the extended price. So you can do this on any sales document manually by going up to the additional option. There's also a hotkey for this, which is Control-6. The recalculation process also happens automatically during the document transfer. So if you have a batch of sales orders and you transfer those orders to invoice, during that transfer process, the tariff will be recalculated on all of the invoices automatically. And take a look at running the calculation and adding it into the miscellaneous field. We're going to go over all the setup options here in a moment. The setting that we're interested here is the apply using miscellaneous charge field. And now if we recalculate the tariff shows up down here in the miscellaneous charge. The purpose of the tariff module is to help you manage pass-through tariff. This is a situation where your vendor is adding surcharge to cover or partially cover their tariff, and you need to pass that through. By using the tariff item or the miscellaneous field on the sales transaction, you can have the tariff revenue directed to a applied tariff revenue GL account. On the purchasing side, those tariffs will likely hit a accrued tariff expense, allowing you to manage or keep track of both sides of this at the general ledger. One of the first settings, so we're going to go through the setup window here, and the first setting on the window is scope. There are three options for scope. Global provides a way to get the module up and running quickly. You specify a tariff percentage and a tariff calculation method that applies to the entire system. Doesn't matter what the country of origin is, or the customer or the item, it's going to calculate the tariff the same on every item, on every sales transaction. If you change the scope to detailed, that opens up more the more the functionality of the module, where you can set up tariffs by country, set up item country code assignment or country of origin, item tariffs, vendor tariff, and customer tariff settings. We'll go through the interaction of all of those in a little bit. The final method is something called custom, and this will be the last one that we cover. Suffice to say that if anything that we go through here today with all of the functionality in the tariff module, if any of that doesn't apply to you or doesn't quite apply, there will always be a yes answer to whether or not we can do this. There are several tariff calculation methods. That's the method field. Percent of value looks at the item, either the standard cost or the current cost. Specific dollars per unit, specific dollars per unit weight, and percent of extended price. We already looked at the different methods for how it adds to a sales transaction. It does this either by adding a line item or by adding it to the miscellaneous charge. If you use a item to add the tariff into the sales lines, it needs to be a non-sales inventory type item. So miscellaneous, service, or flat fee. And then you can set up the GL accounts so that the sales revenue coming from the tariff charge hits a applied tariff revenue account. You could use the same item on the purchasing side to record that expense, in which case you'd use a accrued tariff expense account for the inventory account and the purchase price variance account. Likewise, if you have the tariff inserted into the miscellaneous field on the sales invoice, you can set up the sales miscellaneous posting account to be a applied tariff revenue account. If you are using any of the tariff calculation methods other than percent of extended price, you can have the software look through a bill of materials, either from manufacturing or inventory, or a kit to find all of the components within an assembly that carry tariff. For example, looking at this manufacturing bill of materials, you might sell 100 XLG, but the cost of that includes not only raw materials, but also labor, overhead, and machine time. If you set the module up to look through the bill of materials, it will go through the entire exploded bill of materials, look at each of the buy items, and calculate the tariff that applies or doesn't apply for each one of these, and rolls that all the way back up to the top to calculate the total amount of tariff for the made item. I should point out here that it is also extending the quantity. So if the sales line is for 2 of 100 XLG, that is blowing down through the bill of materials. And so down here at this bottom level, where it needs 4 transistors per unit, it would calculate the tariff on 8 transistors. The setup that is required for the module is the country code setup window, country tariff, and then item country assignment or source of origin. And then you can optionally also do tariff setup on items, vendors, and customers. We'll look at the interaction between all of these in just a minute. When the tariff calculation runs on a per item basis, the first thing it does is it looks through the country tariff, vendor, item, and customer, in the order shown here to see if any of them are excluded from the tariff. So if the country assigned to the item is excluded, then there's no calculation. If the primary vendor for the item is excluded, there's no calculation. Likewise, the item can be excluded or the customer can be excluded. However, all of these lower levels aren't required, and you can just have a country level tariff that applies to all items assigned to that country. The method that it uses for calculating the tariff works in the opposite direction. So once it has stepped through country, vendor, item, and customer to see if the calculation is excluded by any of those, it starts by using the tariff calculation method specified at the customer, if there is one. If there isn't one, it uses it from the item, and then from the vendor, and then from the country. If you do have it looking at a bill of materials or kit, and you've got setup in multiple locations. So you could, for example, have a manufacturing bill of materials and an inventory BOM set up for the same item. It's going to look through those three sources in the order shown here. So we'll start by looking at the manufacturing BOM. If it can't find it, it'll look at the inventory BOM. And if it can't find something there, it looks at the kit. If it passes through all of those and doesn't find anything, it assumes that it is a purchase part, and it just performs the calculation on the current or standard cost if you're using a percent of value method, or it uses the line item extended price. All of the tariff detail entry windows function in the same way. So we're going to look at the country tariff detail entry window specifically, and then we'll step quickly through the other three. So all of the windows are designed to allow you to copy and paste information directly into the setup window. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the existing information from this window and copy my country setup information from this spreadsheet, come back to country tariff and paste it into the window. So this works for all of the windows. So there's the country tariff, item tariff detail, customer detail, vendor detail, and also the item country assignment. And we'll look at that window too, but all of them allow you to copy and paste an entire list from Excel. So item country works the same way. We'll delete a couple of records out of here. And then we've got some setup in our spreadsheet. Come back to the item country window and paste. One thing to note is that item country also has the item weight in it. So if you do need to do a weight-based calculation, this is the window where that is recorded. So for each of these windows, you'll have the country code or the item or the customer. That's the first column in the spreadsheet. Second column is the method. And this is a list of enumerated values. So what shows up in the drop-down list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are excluded, percent of value, specific dollar per unit, specific dollar per weight, and percent of extended price. So if you want to bring in setup for percent of value, that's method number 2. And then the third column is what we call a multiplier, and that's either the percent or the dollar amount. So we already looked at the item tariff detail. This works exactly the same way. Customer tariff detail. and the vendor tariff detail. Um, so one thing to keep in mind with these is it can be used to specify a specific type of tariff calculation, for example, at the customer level, but you can also use it to exclude specific customers. So for various reasons, perhaps there is a contract in place that prevents adding a surcharge or changing prices. You might want to add some customers as excluded into this list. And then referring back to the vendor information, if it is looking for a vendor tariff calculation, it's pulling that based on the primary vendor assigned to an item's default site. So as shown here, in the item quantities maintenance window, you need to have a default site specified. And then when you go to the site-specific record in item quantities maintenance, you need to have a primary vendor assigned. The last tariff calculation method is custom. And what custom does is that when it gets to the point of calculating a tariff for a document, it calls out to a stored procedure on the SQL server. By default, that stored procedure doesn't have any logic. It's a empty stored procedure that we provide so that you can add your own custom coding to do whatever calculation you want it to do. So let's look at a few more examples of how this calculation works. Right now, we have this set up so that China is being calculated at a percent of value, and it's 10%. Let's change that to 20%. And then 128 SDRAM has China as the country of origin. So if we recalculate this document, unit cost is $50, 20% is 10. Let's change this calculation from percent of value to percent of extended price and make this 10%. And now if we recalculate the tariff, you can see that the miscellaneous field has been updated with 10% of the extended price. So you can do this on any sales document manually by going up to the additional option. There's also a hotkey for this, which is Control-6. The recalculation process also happens automatically during the document transfer. So if you have a batch of sales orders and you transfer those orders to invoice, during that transfer process, the tariff will be recalculated on all of the invoices automatically.